Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as we inch closer and closer to potentially shutting down this government, I rise to remind my colleagues what a shutdown would mean for our constituents. I also want to remind my colleagues that it doesn't have to be this way. Budget battles and debt ceiling debates are the norm in Congress right now, but there was a time. There was a time when both parties worked together, and the American people benefited. Now, it hasn't always been rosy. The budget battles of the mid-'90s shut our government down for nearly a month. Personal insults here in the world's greatest deliberative body used to be common. And back in the 1850s, a senator was beaten on the Senate floor. But through it all, Americans trusted their government to meet its constitutional responsibility and keep the lights on. After all, if we couldn't agree on anything else, at least we could agree on keeping the lights on. Today, constant political brinksmanship and grandstanding replace common sense compromise and actual governing. Mr. President, it is taking a toll on all Americans, and Montanans are no exception. With a government shutdown once again a real possibility, America's frustration is reaching new heights. For some folks, the shutdown is another opportunity to shake their heads and bemoan the state of affairs right here in Washington, D.C. They're the lucky ones, because for others, a shutdown will hurt their health, their wallets, their bottom lines. I'm talking about a veteran who could be anywhere in this country, whose disability case appeal could and probably will be delayed if we have a government shutdown. A senior citizen waiting for a Social Security check, a small business owner waiting to get potentially a contract that could fix a decaying road infrastructure, hotels and other businesses around our national parks that would be closed if we have a government shutdown, also holding their breath to see what we're doing here these days. And if the parks close because of a government shutdown, the money coming in and out of the wallets of those businesses and those folks who not only drove to the park in anticipation to be able to utilize it, but the businesses around the park would be impacted very negatively. Everybody knows about the Bakken play that's driving the economic growth in North Dakota and eastern Montana, but if the government shuts down, Bureau of Land Management's permitting office would be shut down too. And that means wells would be delayed and the jobs that come with them. And since the House Republicans have been unwilling to begin negotiations on a new farm bill, farmers and ranchers are going to have a lot of questions come October 1st, on a day that not only will the government shut down, but the farm bill will expire as well. So not only could some folks lose critical nutrition assistance, farmers and ranchers would have no place to go to get their questions answered about the fact that there's no more farm bill for commodity or a commodity title. No more ability to get questions answered about conservation that needs to be planned for far ahead of time. Why? Because their local Farm Service Agency office will be closed. Like the other government offices, nobody's going to be there to answer the phone. In Montana, Washington now is shorthand for uncertainty. Congress is shorthand for dysfunction, and faith in government is being eroded because some folks around here are more concerned about raising money on C-SPAN than the people of this great country and the American economy. It needs to stop. Mr. President, the American people expect members of Congress to make smart, responsible decisions based on the best information that we have. That means advocating for issues that matter, compromising to get something done. That means giving a little and getting a whole lot in return. It's called governing. That's a lesson some folks around here need to learn. I would have thought that flirting with a government shutdown and costing taxpayers billions of dollars in 2011 would have been sufficient enough of a lesson. Or maybe coming within a few hours of falling off the so-called fiscal cliff in 2012 would have been a sufficient lesson. I would have thought that causing an unprecedented credit downgrade 2 years ago by threatening not to raise the debt ceiling would have knocked some sense into some folks. And I would think that the American people's overwhelming desire not to shut the government down come October 1st would cause my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to use common sense. But here we are, playing politics once again as regular Americans twist in the wind. There is a way forward, Mr. President, and it doesn't have to start with political games at the 11th hour. It starts with working through the regular budgets and appropriations process and not proposing amendments just to slow the process down. Funding the government is the easy part. In less than a month, we once again will be reaching a debt ceiling, a much more serious issue. If we don't raise it before then, we won't be able to pay our bills. The economy will be devastated. Crashing into the debt ceiling will cause our credit rating to drop, increase our interest rates not only on our government debt, but for anybody who has debt. If you don't believe a farmer from Big Sandy, Montana, maybe you'll believe a guy by the name of Mark Zandi, an economist who's advised presidents, presidential candidates, Fortune 500 companies. He said failing to raise the debt ceiling will hurt consumers, business confidence, force businesses to stop hiring, raise borrowing costs for average Americans. He's far from alone. Former Republican Senator Judd Gregg says failing to pay our bills would lead to job losses and more debt. He calls failing to raise the debt ceiling a terrible policy, would produce difficult times for people on Main Street. Senator Gregg, who I had the opportunity to serve with, spent 18 years here in the Senate. He knows that as long as Congress fails to provide the American people the political and economic certainty by funding the government, raising the debt limit, we won't be able to tackle other important issues like replacing the sequester that the senator from Alaska talked about, replacing with smart budget cuts, or striking a long-term budget agreement that will put this nation on solid economic footing. Mr. President, a government shutdown would be irresponsible and it would be unnecessary. Congress needs to do its job by finding a way to responsibly keep the government running. We cannot keep holding businesses, seniors, working families, veterans, students, our military men and women hostage to the political whims and aspirations of a select few. When I was a member of the Montana Senate, my colleagues and I knew what we had to get done every session. Passing a budget was at the top of the list. Even if we didn't agree where to cut or where to spend, we worked together to figure it out. And just like my former colleagues in Montana did this spring, we passed a budget. We kept the state government running. Here in Washington, there's a lot of pressures that we don't face at the state level. There are news channels that give any senator a chance to get on TV, and every issue has an advocacy group fighting for its share of the pie. But real leaders make tough decisions. Real leaders work together to find common ground and move our nation forward. Real leaders put their constituents first. It's not too late. It's not too late for us to regain the trust of the American people, but it's going to take some work. We won't be able to do it right away, but we ought to start this week. And we can start by responsibly funding the government, providing our economy and our nation with the confidence that they need. That's what we did in Montana, and that's what we need to do here in Washington. The American people are calling for an end to the brinksmanship and an end to the gridlock. And it's time we start to listen to them.